I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Wednesday, November 23rd, 2022. A holiday weekend, one that all of us have time to reflect on, and we can reflect differently, broadly. We've done stories in the newspaper about Thanksgiving celebrations in Africa. Uh, and I think the country here is traveling afoot, but often we wonder about the origin of Thanksgiving. Well, today's program, Wednesday, generally focuses on wealth creation and business development. We've been working with an organization called Finnovation that is supporting entrepreneurship and creative engagement and community by small businesses and agencies. And today is part of the series of connecting with Finnovation Fellows. And my guest today is Brook LaFloe. She's the co-founder and operator of Niniijaanis, One of Ones. She'll tell you what it's all about in a minute. We're going to introduce her by way, however, of a video, and then we'll bring Brook in and have this conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. Thank you for being here. Let's check this out.
Bonjour, Wagagamijing Zibimani Duokwe Indigenous Mikanakwaji and Dunjuba. Hello, I was named after the bend in the river. My English name is Brook LaFloe. I come from the Turtle Mountains, but I mostly grew up here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I am the owner and operator of Niniijaanis One of Ones, a social enterprise for Indigenous children. I have my master's in Montessori education, 2 international Montessori teaching diplomas, and I'm a social entrepreneur by choice. But one of my greatest titles is Oma Seyen. Oma Seyen means I am the older sister to Nishimi Dakota, the youngest child. Dakota is a Montessori kid and grew up with his culture. He understands the people he comes from, he's an ambassador for his school, and is a role model and culture bearer for his peers and community. Part of my duty as Oma Seyen, as older sister, is to ensure that he has the tools and knowledge he needs for Mino Bimadaziwan to live a good life. Children, culture, and kinship is the real inspiration behind the social enterprise. This is exactly what Niniijaanis One of One strives to do, to assist Indigenous families and communities traditionally serve the whole child in order to affirm and reclaim our children's identities and education. Growing evidence suggests that children immersed in their language, their culture, and supported by families in their foundational years will form strong self-identities and build resilience to challenges of racial inequity and bias for years to come. The problem we're solving is tackling educational redesign and equity. We focus on early childhood, particularly from birth through age 6, because they are the most impressionable years for rapid brain and personality development, where we can build a strong foundation for life. We currently operate online through e-commerce. We sell and give away culturally relevant learning materials and curriculum, and fundraise with our one-of-a-kind handmade items. With Niniijaanis, children can be exposed to a culturally responsive education, providing children and families tools and knowledge they will not receive in a traditional educational or child care setting. When non-Native children engage with our materials, they learn from a perspective that is culturally accurate and appropriate. Our solution is a fundamental way to help all children feel seen and understood by their peers through new learning opportunities. Families get to co-create a learning experience that best fits their child's needs, whether that means creating future American Indian leaders or future global citizens. For year 2, we are looking to get wheels to pair our products with our services. We are launching a crowdfunding campaign in July to raise approximately $45,000 for our first infrastructure, a turtle top van, and all the work necessary to refurbish it into a mobile learning environment in school. Our educational services include a reservation tour of 11 Minnesota tribes, home visits, family nests, powwow vending, curriculum consultations, and teacher trainings. Statewide services beginning in year 3 are projected to bring in an additional $24K in revenue per year. Who are we and how do we do this? We are a collective of Indigenous educators and artisans that come from the communities we serve. We strive to create equity in early childhood through our Niniijaanis learning materials, through fundraising with our one-of-ones, and soon with your help through our educational statewide services. I want to say thank you, Chimi Gwich, for your generosity and support to help us make a better world for our children.
And what a wonderful introduction. So let me introduce and bring in Brook LaFloe. Brook, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. This reminded me, this is more than simple conversation. It's spiritual for me. Mm, I'm feeling and thinking about on my Friday version of this show with Dr. Brevada Garrett Akinsanya. We talk about an Africana way of knowing, a way of knowing that is, in a sense, resistant to the oppression of the colonist, and that seeks to discover how we can remember or remember our ancient ways of knowing as a guidepost to the futures that reflect our dignity, our heritage, our right to be, part of the human family. And so, what we do on Fridays, and I want to do it here, is sort of a statement of respect for the owners of the land. I may not have the language right, but you've been hearing this. Now, maybe you can talk about this to me as we go along, explain the reason and the value, if it is valuable. But one of the things that I love when Dr. B does it, she says that we acknowledge our elders because they are closest to the ancestors. We acknowledge the ancestors because they are closest to the Creator. And then she says we acknowledge the Creator because in the Creator we see each of us, and in each of us we see the Creator. It's a circle. And we talk about operating and being and sitting in a circle. A circle connotes infinity and the idea that power resides in the center of the circle and that it is owned by everybody, and that in the instance of our program, our conversation with several guests, we have a talking stick that we share with each other, a pass from back and forth, and that means we all acknowledge that this person with the talking stick is speaking at the moment, and when he or she stops, he passes it or she passes it to the next person. So we wrap that up every time with an acknowledgement of the owners or the guardians of the land that we are in. And though our audiences and participants may be national or international, we, Dr. B and I, physically located here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So we honor the Lakota people, the Ojibwe people, the Ho-Chunk people, and the people who have served for generations and generations as stewards and guardians of the land. So I think that's an appropriate thing to do. I love doing it, and I need to and want to learn the power of it in my spirit by doing it. So I'm going to start with asking you, how does that resonate with you? And am I on the right path?
Yeah, I totally think you're on the right path, and I'm glad you did do that. It's really important to understand that American history didn't start when everyone else came over here, that there was a people here long, long before that. And as you mentioned, the stewards of the land, right? We were able to take care of this land for millennials until, the colonizers came over to create what is known as America. So, and America was, built because it was amazing land, right? People came here to, westward expansion, to settle, to farm, to create a new life for themselves. And it was all accessible because American Indian people took care of this land really well. And I would say still do in respect to where they can be and how much they can still contribute to the land. So.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you for the work that I'm learning about through your video, but I want to ask you to take some time to stretch out and talk more about what is the source and the vision of the work that you do, what drives your passion, and what fulfillment comes from being in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will briefly explain. Niniijaanis is an Ojibwe word, and it denotes my child. If you put the Ni, the ni in front of something, it's in relation to oneself. Niniijaanis is a child in Ojibwe, so it's relation into my relationship with my child. And it really came out of a community project called Niniijaanis Discovery. We were a community project with 3 of us. We got mini grants to explore children's materials and children's curriculum. And I have a background in Montessori, the Montessori method. So I was exploring the Montessori materials and curriculum and finding ways to make it more indigenous. So it was a way to rediscover our children's needs, to not just do that ourselves, but to do that with parents, with community members. We brought in artists because artists were able to create a lot of the materials that we were making. So it was a way to bring in the whole community to rediscover what it is that our children need to learn and what they need to thrive at their early stages of development. So that's where Niniijaanis really came from in 2018, and it's grown extensively in ways that I could not have predicted. But we always keep that focus of our children at the forefront of all the work we do, and helping our children find their cultural identities through all of the our materials, our artwork, our events, and what we recently brought in a boys basketball team. We call it hoop medicine, right? Being able to play for their ancestors and play for their relatives. So at the core is our children, but we have grown in many ways since our inception.
Where are you located physically? Where's your base for the organization, your work?
I'm here in St. Paul, east side of St. Paul. So I grew up here, but our artists are around the state, I would say. Some of them live on the reservations, Mille Lacs, Red Lake, White Earth. We have a few artists in Duluth, but the core of our work is here in St. Paul right now, I'd say.
I mean, is there an actual facility that is your headquarters, or is your work all virtual and movement?
Not a facility yet. I mean, my house here, we have a workroom that everyone can come to if they'd like to.
Sure.
But we are still hoping to create a mobile classroom, and then somewhere down the line in like the 10-year plan, create like an actual store. We birthed in COVID, so during COVID, obviously everything was shut down. That wasn't the right move to make at that time, but it's still in the long-term plans.
So I love the idea of the war pony. Talk about that. Explain. I love the language, number one. Language is so important, and we take stuff for granted too often, I think, and we don't examine what's behind words and what they make us feel and do. My example, Brooke, is that I don't know if you know one of our elders, Mahmoud El-Kati, from McAllister College in St. Paul, but he gave a lecture once talking about, and I say this all the time, the word remember. And so, you say, I remember, oh, I forgot, I remember, oh, I forgot, I remember. It's like, you don't think about it, Then he said, think about the word dismember, and then think about remember. And he said, think about the fact that as a people, we have been dismembered, disconnected from our history, from our culture, from our stories, and that the dismembering, and he takes it to sort of a biblical context, it's like the valley of the dry dead bones that the prophet Ezekiel talked about. And the question that the Creator asked him was, can these bones live again? Well, what if those parts of us that have been dispersed, dismembered, can reconnect, remember? We become our true, authentic selves once again. So that's what word power means to me. And I take that even in your naming this vehicle, the War Pony. And that's a long way of getting to it, but tell me about it.
Yeah. And you're right. It is very intentional with our words and why we picked War Pony. And it's a little bit of play on words, but historically, war ponies, a warrior would have a war pony, and before they would go to any sort of actions, they would prepare with that pony in a spiritual way, in a physical way. I guess all of it is cultural. So in a cultural way, and they would take time with their pony to prepare themselves and their pony. And that's what we kind of were thinking of doing with our mobile unit and our mobile school, right? Is that we're not just preparing our children, but we're preparing ourselves to, battle these educational disparities, to create more equity for our children in our own communities and for us and by us, right? Not the other way, not the way it's been presented to us, not sending our kids away. There was that whole boarding school era where our children were taken from us. This is an act of bringing our children back to us and allowing them to stay with us, and knowing that they learn best when they're in their culture, immersed in their language, around their relatives and their extended relatives, that they learn they're a part of a community larger than themselves. So that war pony was a way for us to prepare our children and ourselves. And then it also became, when cars came around, it became another term of a means of transportation, right? We call our cars our war ponies. So that was just another play on words of it's a mobile unit. So it'll be on the move with us and transporting, not transporting for the sense of transporting, but a mobile classroom moving around. So
it reminds me that I was at the Dakota community when they launched the Dakota Casino.
The one in Shakopee, or
in Shakopee. Yep. And the elders there, the president, I think, of the community, in his opening prayer, and it sticks with me, said, to the Great Spirit, thank you for sending a new buffalo, right? And because they attempted to annihilate and wipe out, this relationship we had that was life-sustaining with the buffalo, and all the buffalo represented and gave to us as a people. Yep. And to the Great Spirit, he said, you've been with us all the time, and now you've delivered a new buffalo, right? That will take our people forward. I thought that was rich. I thought it was, it's eye-opening. But again, it's to the power of language, to the power of perception, how you ideate, how do you frame something? And too often, the oppressive nature of the colonists, from my point of view, Brooke, is that they say something and expect us to believe it simply because they said it. And what they said suits them and their interest, period. And to them, and in their focus on their own interest, their selfish focus on their interest, our humanity is inconsequential, not important. Our lives don't matter. But we resist, and we say that our lives do matter. Our existence is real, and that at the end of the day, we believe that we are going to prevail in creating a world that supports us and that ultimately transforms them into being the decent human beings that they are capable of being. So we're not condemning them. We're saying that there's some problems there, and that we believe that the strength of our culture, tested as it has been in the past 500 years, will continue to emerge and figure out a path for not only our reemergence, but your salvation as well. I don't know. What do you think? I'm just talking. So what do you think, Brook LaFloe?
Oh yeah, I'm with there. I'm right there with you. I'm kind of a radical, outspoken person. I'm gonna tame it down a little bit today. I've gotten myself in trouble at times.
Please don't. This is a free space, and say what you feel and tell your truth the way you see it. So
yeah, and I'll speak as an Indigenous person, right? So I'm all Native. I'm a little bit French, but I speak only for my community and myself, not even my whole community, right? Because there's tribes of Indigenous tribes. There's 500 federally recognized tribes in America. I'm only Ojibwe. So, but our people are extremely resilient. We've survived genocide. Like I said, the boarding school era where they tried to rip our families apart. There's federal policy after federal policy for American Indians specifically, right? That have tried to assimilate us into the cities and tried to assimilate us into the school systems, and many things that tried to rid us of our language and our culture. And it's within federal policies, and it's within our society as well. I just say that we are so resilient to still be here. And I do contribute a lot of that to our cultural ways and to our old teachings and the things that have gone underground and been able to be passed on to some of us now, which, the Federal Religious Freedom Act, we don't have to do ceremonies underground anymore. We can do them openly and publicly and lawfully now, right? There was a time when we couldn't lawfully practice our ceremonies, which is a true, way to kill our spirit as well. So every attack that could have been made on indigenous populations in the Americas was made.
Yeah.
Spiritually, culturally, physically, linguistically, I guess you could say. Even the language we speak, English now, it's a different way of thinking than our own worldviews and our own languages. So I say that we are very resilient, that we are still here and we are still growing and a thriving population. There used to be millions of us, and I hope to see the day that there will be millions of us again in the Americas.
Oh, that's amazing. That's wonderful. And part of it has to be educating ourselves, taking responsibility and taking charge of our education, and it's not to devalue or diminish the science and knowledge that other systems have created, but it's to put them in perspective and to see what's useful and what's not. What's a fact and what's opinion, and to separate the two. And what is factually appropriate. 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah, it's cool. We can do that. But then we may know ways where 1 + 1 = something else, and we have to recognize that we have the possibility or the right to organize the discussion around what they presented as 1 + 1 differently. And we may be operating, looking at the same thing, but in different ways. And the ways we look at it would produce different outcomes, different understandings, different awarenesses, and different possibilities. So tell me about you, if you would, Brooke, your personal story. You mentioned you've got a master's degree in education, is that it? In education?
Yeah.
What's your personal path?
Yeah. So my personal path, I grew up mostly here in the Twin Cities. Both my parents and all of my grandparents come from the Turtle Mountain Reservation in North Dakota. So we are Ojibwe people, but we're living in the plains. So in the plains is where a lot of our Dakota and Lakota relatives live. So as Ojibwe people in the plains, we've adapted certain practices. We're borderline Canada. So we also have our people in Canada. We're close to the Crees as well. Turtle Mountain people created a trade language called Michif during the fur trade with the French. That language is pretty much non-existent now. So we've gone back to Ojibwe. But I spent a lot of holidays home on the reservation with my family. And then I spent a lot of my school years here in the Twin Cities, all the way through high school. And then I was super, super fortunate to get a Gates Millennium Scholarship. My family was by no means rich. I was Pell Grant eligible. That means you pretty much got to be living in poverty to receive a Pell Grant.
Sure.
So I was able to get the Gates Scholarship and go to school for 10 years for free. It covered all my unmet needs. And I took that opportunity and I ran with it. And I was like, I got to go get as much, of the Eurocentric education, as many degrees as I can. My mom was, a good Indian woman. She said, go out there, honey, go get educated, come back and help your people and serve your people. So, which is why I'm back here, right? I'm back in the Twin Cities and back in St. Paul. I actually came back to work with my mother at her Montessori school after I went to Tulane. I went to McAllister actually first. That's where my mother went. Went to Tulane University, and then I finished my master's at Maryland Loyola. Loyola, Maryland. Loyola University, Maryland.
Sure.
Came home, and then I started working at the Montessori American Indian Child Care Center with my mom, which she founded from a Bush Fellowship, actually. She spent a lot of her life, dedicated all her life working at American Indian nonprofit organizations. And one of the needs in our community, in many communities, I would say, right, is early childhood. There's not enough programs or services to meet the needs of all the kids that already are here with us. And there was definitely nothing to meet the needs of American Indian kids in Ramsey County at all, or St. Paul. So she started that Montessori. I came home to work with her. And that's where my journey began into this Indigenous Montessori method that we've been developing and piloting different materials, different learning curriculums. And then, yeah, I've been home since 2018. And
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Johnson, St. Paul. Well, I started at Highland, St. Paul
Okay.
Highland,
Okay.
and then I graduated from St. Paul Johnson in 2011.
Okay. Well, was my friend Dr. What's her name? Dr. Henderson, was she there when you were there? Dr. Henderson?
I'm not sure.
She might not have been. She was a principal, I think, at Highland at one point in time, but she's retired now. But just the name pops up in my mind. Well, so take us through. I'm going to come back to your personal, because I asked my guests to reflect on their 5-year-old self and where they are now, and I asked them to talk about their vision of the future. So I'll have you think about that, and I'll come back to that. But take us through the Montessori concept. What is it about? For people that don't know what Montessori means, I think it's celebrated and appreciated, and then take us through how you've been able to incorporate that with the culture, the Ojibwe culture, right? And create a model that is reflective of that culture and its aspirations and its obligation to children and learning. How have you merged those together?
Absolutely. I'll start by saying Montessori method was named after the woman who developed it, Maria Montessori. It's not a monastery. People confuse it with the church a lot.
Right.
There's no ties there. There's no ties to the church. It was named after the woman who developed the method. And she was an Italian woman. She was phenomenally privileged, right? She was a doctor when women weren't doctors yet. She got to travel the world before, airborne flights were accessible to everybody. And when she did travel the world, she worked with children all over the world, right? She worked with the untouchables in India. She's been to all of the European countries. She's been to Africa. She came to the US or to North America. And she developed her method based on human tendencies, right? So that's why it's not based in a Eurocentric model. It's based on human tendencies because she was able to study children all over the world and learn how all children learned. And one of her primary tools is called observation, right? She watched children learn for many, many hours. And when you go through Montessori training, you have to, do so many hours of just observation and watching children learn. So that you can, kind of incarnate their curiosity and their spirit, and the ways that they learn it's far more than just physical. So that method was developed with children around the world. And to that, I say, it's not based in one race. It's not based in one ethnicity. It's not even based in one country, right? There's this whole world view, this whole global citizenship around this Montessori method. In America, unfortunately, we've kind of taken it for some of the privileged and the elite, and it's expensive in some places. But that's not really the basis that it started as, and it's not true about. I wouldn't say that's also true around the world either, right? The world still has Montessoris all over.
So let me jump in here. What I'm hearing is that you're describing a system that is not nationalist.
Yeah.
That does not serve as an agent of the state, a training tool to affirm one particular worldview. Instead, a process that is based on observation of how children, all children, absorb knowledge and learn. And therefore it's global and not restrictive. So am I listening? Am I hearing you? Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. That is correct.
Okay.
And there's the Association Montessori International is the true method that came from Maria Montessori herself. So it is international, right? And again, like I said, in America, they made their own in Montessori. They call it AMS, American Montessori Society. But it's not the true method from the actual source of Maria Montessori herself.
Okay.
So to say, it is an international method, but America has, nationalized it in their own way, as we do everything. But yeah, I think when I was studying the method, and as my mom, before me studied the method, there were so many compatibilities. And I think Maria Montessori must have had an indigenous native person in her corner speaking
Mhm.
to her, because she even speaks about children as having a spiritual embryo, right? And I've never seen any other educational pedagogy or method speak of children in that way. So that's why we must be careful how we present ourselves to our children, how we speak to our children, how we treat our children. Because she mentions, right, like there's a spiritual aspect to all of our children. And in our way, as you mentioned earlier, the ancestors are closer to our elders. In Anishinaabe culture, we also believe that our children come straight from the spirit world and they choose their parents. So in the reverse order, our elders are closer to our ancestors. Our children are also coming directly from them, right?
Mhm.
So that's also a teaching that I've grown up with about why you respect your children, why you never, hit your children. Parents themselves were never supposed to actually discipline their children. That was the jobs of their brothers and sisters. The aunties and uncles
Hmm.
were supposed to be the ones who discipline
Mhm.
their nieces and nephews, because parents were only allowed to have that loving, supportive relationship with their children, so that
Oh,
their children could develop in a good way. So there's
I've never heard that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
old ways that have been lost, right?
Mhm.
Lost over
Mhm.
time, and trying to revitalize some of these concepts and ideas.
Well,
Um,
so Brooke, I grew up in the old school, the old black church. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So if you're a child, that means get ready to get beat, right? And
yeah,
you're gonna be beat for a long time. And some families have horrific stories of brutalization by people who thought they were doing the right thing
yeah,
and brutalizing and terrorizing their children. And let me jump in here quickly. I remember Bill Wilson used to be a city council member in St. Paul. His wife was Willie Mae Wilson. She ran the St. Paul Urban League. And once I was talking to her, and I talked about, my wife Bobby and I have we have two daughters we raised, and talked about spanking children. So she said, "I never spanked my children." I said, "You didn't? Why?" Because I just thought you were supposed to, right? And so she said, "Talk to them." And from that day on, it was like an awakening. And so I don't know. I think it's important to have conversations about why we do that, why we uh, do this brutality on our own children, on each other. So that's just an aside. Go ahead. I'm just
yeah.
chiming in here. Go ahead.
And I can't give a correct answer to that. I guess I could just give my thoughts and feelings, is that some of those things were introduced to us, right?
Mhm, mhm,
I would say definitely through the boarding school era, when our children were beat.
mhm.
Those kids came home and didn't know they were beaten. They didn't know any other way to raise their own children, right?
So they start
Um,
beating. Yeah.
so I think some of those things were introduced to us. And again, when I say, like the concepts of intellectual, spiritual, physical warfare, once you change the minds of the people, right, like that, those things lived on. There's a great amount of domestic violence in American Indian communities to this day because of those things.
Hmm.
So just to speak of how successful that period was, we're trying to reverse those things by bringing our children back to us. And doing it through our children again, right? They did it through our children. We're taking that same model of let's bring it back to our children, right? So yeah, I think that's where some of it was introduced, and I don't think it was always a part of our culture, of our traditional culture, anyways, from what I've been able to study.
Mhm.
Um, so, and then language too. You mentioned language, right? You should be able to speak to your children, and then um, you'll also be able to see their own development by how much they understand the language you're speaking to them, right?
Mhm.
3-year-olds might not grasp every concept of discipline, or do this and don't do that, but we might hit them anyways, and that's where the trauma comes in, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because they don't even understand yet the language of what they did or didn't do wrong.
Mhm.
And that's where, again, there's just no need to introduce violence at that age, because it becomes traumatizing as opposed to a means of teaching or reinforcing or reaffirming anything that you actually want to teach them. They get a little bit older after 6. In the Montessori method, it goes by years of 6. So the first 6 years is infancy, the next 6 years is childhood, and then then there's the teenage years, and then there's the adolescent years. So 6 years old is when you can start introducing more concepts
Sure.
outside of reality, more imaginative concepts.
Well, here's another question that I just never thought of before. I've always viewed Montessori as preschool. Is it only preschool?
It is not, but here it's most accessible through the younger years, through preschool. So I'm trained in assistant through infancy, so that's 0 to 3, and then 3 to 6. Those are the two periods of infancy, and they're broken down that way because from 0 to 3, the brain doesn't really have a working memory. So children are absorbing everything in their environment and everything they hear, all the language, but they might not be able to recall that or actually remember that, as we spoke of language. But at 3 years old, that memory starts to kick in more, right? So children are able to learn language a little bit better and understand it after 3 years old. But when we were, 2, we probably learned the difference between wood and carpet, right? I don't ever remember learning the difference between wood and carpet, but it happened, in my first 3 years. So the infancy years are broken down 0 to 3 and 3 to 6, just based on that working memory. And then after that, it goes by 6 years. So there's the childhood years, 6 to 12. And then each category looks very different as well, I would say, in Montessori, right? The teenage years, 13 to 18, before they're adolescents. The Montessori method has like this farm school model, right? Of like learning, having children or teenagers at that point learn how to farm on the land, where food comes from, right? All these things that are going to prepare them to be adults, sufficient adults. And again, at a time when, more people were growing their own food and farming. We have stores and convenience now that didn't exist back then. But if we were ever to go in the reverse era, we would need those methods back, right? Like we would need to know how to grow our own food again. We would need to, learn how to take care of ourselves without the convenience.
And we got to be headed in that direction, I think. I think that's the way we have to go. I live in North Minneapolis, right? And I remember for one period of time, there was a lot of emphasis on the corner stores and how the corner stores were part of a food desert system. They didn't have, foods that were healthier, fresh produce and things like that, but they were marketing both cigarettes and candy and potato chips and snacks and fast food. And that was at a time when, it was as if children or young people were saying, if it isn't in a store, what am I going to do? It's like they say that they were go hungry because they didn't have the money to go buy it from the corner store, whatever it was, right? There's a whole psychology developing like that. And the question I would raise is, this is supposedly 10,000 lakes. Fish are here. And our people are disconnected from that process of going fishing, going hunting, growing food in your own yard, gardening, farming. And that is part of what we lost. And so your comments just now reminded me of that thought. And, I still think we have to get back to where we use space that we have in our homes, even in our apartments, we can do micro food growing. And the main thing is just to be more aware of non-processed and healthier foods and make better choices and not simply be, pawns of the market, of the marketeers to our own peril.
Yep, I agree. I was thinking of this joke. There's this this young child arguing with his dad about where the beef came from, and the dad was saying it came from the cow, and the kid was saying it came from the store. So education in its best example, right? About where the food comes from. And even, picking berries is free. Picking mushrooms are free, and those things aren't far away, removed from the cities. A lot of those things are here in the cities too. So again, that relationship with the land, and then just with other forms of life, right? Plants are living things. So it's good to have plants in your house. The Montessori method says, there's a curriculum around life outside of humans, right? So we teach children to care for plants, and how to grow plants, and water them or overwater them, right? So there's that whole relationship to life, that isn't just human life, right? We also talk about animals, right? If most in early childhood, it's hard to, with DHS and regulations around early child, to have classroom pets, but it is encouraged in the Montessori method. If you could have fish, right? That we also take care of life outside of human life, and that we're all codependent on each other, from the plants producing oxygen for us and us producing carbon monoxide for the plants, right? There's this interdependence that also aligns with a lot of indigenous values and like ways of knowing that we knew already before, before we found the Montessori method, or before colonization came over, and Western science, right, about plant life and stuff. So there's a lot of alignment there.
And that also extends to the what you described as what they call the sentient world, the animal living world, but there's also the non-sentient, or the mineral world. And I think the alignment includes an appreciation and understanding and awareness of our relationship to things that are not alive as we know alive, but they may be alive differently, like rocks, and like earth, and like minerals, and like air, and things like that. Any thoughts on that, in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, again, like the things, and I think this might kind of get into like that spiritual realm, right, of like what's seen and unseen, right? Like rocks are made up of matter. Wood tables, even though they're not the growing tree anymore, are still made up of matter. And we might not see every minuscule part of the matter, but it's still all there, living, like you mentioned, right? Like the earth is spinning. And in our indigenous ways, we have, it's called animate and inanimate in our language, right? There's a lot of living animate things in our language, like tables, right? Like the earth, like the sky. And it might not be for our human eyes to like see those spiritual things, but they're still there. They're still existing with us. Even the color spectrum, right? Like the human color spectrum is limited, right? Like dogs can see more colors than us. So it's just to say that there are things that exist that we can't all see, but they're with us every day. They're around us. And yeah, I would say minerals hold a lot of life for us too.
And so come back to language. I read a book. I'm reading a series of books by a Ghanaian author. His name is Ikwe Arma. One of the books is called I think it's called The Eloquence of the Scribes, but there are several that I'm reading, and I can't remember what each one says distinctly, because they're all flowing together in my mind. But in one, he talks about teaching children ancient languages, and out of that comes a sort of a new movement around to study ancient Egyptian writing, or hieroglyphic. So I've taken a course in hieroglyphic writing. It's online, being taught by a brother named Dr. Mario Beatty. He's a professor at Howard University, teaching Africana studies and teaching hieroglyphic writing. And the learning of hieroglyphics is not just the learning of the symbols, but it's learning all the things associated, the philosophies, right? The way of knowing, the perception, Um, and so it tells me that kind of where you choose to start from, sort of predicts where you're going to end up or what the outcomes can be. And if you choose to anchor your sense of the beginning at the arrival of the colonizers, the story you're going to tell is a milestone after milestone after milestone after milestone of their victories.
Yep.
But you never tell a story about our victory or your victory because that's not part of the construct. And so the need then is to figure out language and to return to explore and build on language that preceded that experience, right? That puts all that happened in another context that allows you to also undo the damage that was done in and through that understanding. What do you think about that? How does language work for you? That's how I see it, but what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe everybody's indigenous to somewhere, right? And my study of indigenous languages, not just my own, is that indigenous languages hold secrets to the land. And they hold secrets to our ecology, right? So that's why they always say, indigenous people are stewards of their land, right? In Africa, in North America, South America, in the Asias, because our languages, we might have, the Eskimos have like 20 words for snow up there for like the different formations from ice to water to frost or whatever. And that those languages hold secrets to our land and to the medicines, right? Like a lot of the medicines come from the land too. Yes. So I do think that if we want to maintain our land and our secrets to our land, that we need to maintain our indigenous languages all around the world, not just my language, right? I mean, I want to keep my own language for my own identity, but I understand that Dakota is important. African indigenous languages are important. They're all important to our society as a whole. Because again, English is just one. I'm grateful it allows us to communicate and have a relationship, but it's also caused harm, right? And it also doesn't keep the secrets of what cedar and bark and all the medicines that are here in Minnesota, right? It doesn't hold all those secrets. So there's this deep connection to languages that's are the way we think, but it's also again related to all of those other aspects around us. And yeah.
This is such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being with me. I wanted to ask you to take a minute to talk about the Indigenous Peoples Weekend event that you had recently. And you may have some events coming up. I want to make sure you have a chance to promote those as well.
Yeah. So we held, this was our first event as a collective. It was a basketball expo. It was held during the weekend of Indigenous Peoples Day, which most people know as Christopher Columbus Day. And here in the St. Paul community, the Twin Cities community, we took this day back ever since I was a kid. I've never known Columbus Day. I've only known Indigenous Peoples Day, which, again, props to all of my elders and all my mentors who made sure that I knew my history as a young person, that we don't need to celebrate the colonizer, right? Like the person who created great genocide amongst us, but we can take this time back to celebrate ourselves and to celebrate our resiliency, the fact that we are still here. And with COVID, we usually have a big community parade where all of the natives like orgs and all the students get to come out to this parade. It was shut down the past few years, but it came back this year. And with that, our organization, Niniijaanis One of Ones, tagged on a basketball expo during the weekend, right? So we're like, let's not just take back the day, let's take back the whole weekend. And one of the growths that we've had with Niniijaanis is that we've had some young men come to us and ask them to sponsor their basketball team. So now these young men have, in the summers mostly, they go around the country and they play with MMIW on their chest, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. So we play to raise awareness, but we also play for those relatives who have gone on, who have experienced injustice, right? So raising awareness, but also playing for our own healing and for our own, what we call hoop medicine, right? To have a good outlet, a good, positive, healthy outlet, physically, mentally, spiritually, to go do something. So these young men asked us to sponsor their teams. We've been playing with each other for 3 years now. I'm one of the coaches, and they wanted to host this basketball expo during Indigenous Peoples Weekend. So it was a 3-on-3. We had a youth camp. We had an MMIW panel of people speaking about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Minnesota is also past the task force for missing and murdered African women too, right? So like, this isn't a pandemic that just affects our community, but affects the African American community as well. So that was spoken about, the policies. We had one of our coaches on there speaking about how we use basketball to help heal ourselves. And then there was a 3-on-3 for both adults and high schoolers, because we recognize, in our community, there's basketball families, right? From grandpa to grandson. We have some of those on our team. So we wanted to make it intergenerational, right? And that's what hoop medicine is all about, is that game is passed on from generation to generation, just like our culture is, just like our language is. So we had a high school and adult 3-on-3. We had a Famous Dave's community feast. Famous Dave's, he was a Native American man who was a great at barbecue. He's since sold his restaurant, but Indigenous owned roots, I guess. And then we had a bunch of community performances as well. We brought in some of the dancers, some youth dancers and some youth performers, to just share their own skills, and to share our culture. So it was about a lot about culture sharing. And because it was here in the cities and it was at our boys' high school, 4 of our boys attend Harding's High School, we were able to share with cultures outside of just our own, right? And the importance of using sport as medicine, using culture as medicine, and just being able to come and share and educate people too on our movements and the things that our boys team has been doing. So that was awesome.
Where do you see us going? What relationships matter with other Indigenous people? And I think that you refer to, people in South America, Indigenous people in Africa, Indigenous Asia, Indigenous, and that everybody, Europeans, Indigenous to Europe, right?
Yep.
How do we move forward from your point of view to a world that operates with a sense of balance and a sense of justice, right? A sense that that values knowledge and makes knowledge available to everyone, that is, as you described, intergenerational and intentional, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I would say it starts with, a lot of our history has been told from the colonizer's perspective. And I think it starts with learning that other perspective, right? Like, who suffered at the hands of the colonizers? And this is everybody in the world, right? The whole world's pretty much been colonized. So it starts at learning the truths of that, right? That America didn't start in 1491, right? We've been here. So it starts at recognizing some of those things, educating yourself on the other side of that story, so that you can realize ways in which harm is perpetuated through colonial aspects, like land ownership in one, is still harmful in many ways. Like, all these universities were a lot of land grab universities. They were built because they took the land from reservations or from Native people. So and a lot of those universities have started looking at that other side of the story, like at their own origins, right? There's still universities giving back bodies of dead Native people, repatriating those remains to tribes, and those are people's relatives. So I think it really does start at a recognition of Indigenous history and culture, and ways that Indigenous histories and cultures have contributed to the society that we currently live in, right? That America was able to be established because of the labor of slaves, but also the land of Indigenous people, right? And it's recognizing those truths, and making sure that you aren't going to perpetuate the harm that continues to happen because of colonization. I say it's still not over, right? Like, it's still happening in many ways that we may not see like physical land grabs anymore, but there's policies, right? There's federal policies, and not even just federal policies, there's organizational policies that people enact. So it's up to those leaders and those people to truly look inward and look at their own, their own doings of how they continue to perpetuate harm, or how they continue to open up truth, right? I think Minnetonka has done a great job. They've been selling moccasins for a long, long time. And they hired my friend Adrienne Benjamin. She's a member of our collective to help her reconcile, right? To help them reconcile how they no longer perpetuate harm, but they're going to still sell moccasins, but they're going to start giving, more back to the indigenous people. They're going to start raising artists up and bringing awareness to those artists. So they're sharing their economy, right? And they don't have to, right? Like a lot of things don't have to, but making that conscious choice too, and recognize indigenous people, recognize indigenous truths will be the start to just creating like more global citizenship, and so that we don't continue to perpetuate those same harms.
While you were talking, I went back to my archive and pulled up a cover of one of the Insight News from a few years back, but it's a beautiful cover. I want to share it with you. Can you see that?
Yeah, I think that's David Carlson, right?
Let's see.
On the
Yep.
left.
David Carlson, yep, and Sam Pacini. So you know those guys?
I know David on the left. He's
Okay.
he's a big powwow guy around the cities here. So
Okay, and Sam and David, I think, are both in. I'm not sure David is North Minneapolis or not, but Sam kind of grew up. Well, I don't know for sure. I know that both of these guys are friends of my daughters, right? And so, and I'd see them in their regular street clothes, and I didn't know David, but Sam, see Sam all the time, hang out, be at the baseball game together, stuff like that. And then when one of my daughters took this picture of him, I said, "Oh, holy Moses!" I didn't say that, but I said, "Wow, this is so powerful and so beautiful." And to me, it just takes us to our truth, our true selves, and our true elegance, our true beauty, our true magnificence, and in a way that respects the culture, that reveals the complexity of the culture. That I look at these two guys, two gentlemen, these two men, and what I do know is that everything they are wearing probably is language. That every single stitch has a meaning, and every single stitch is speaking something about the world and the other worlds that exist at the same time in the same place. But I thought that was just a wonderful, wonderful photograph. This was at a powwow at North High School. I think they do an annual powwow at North High School. And so I think the more that we can celebrate culture and show and walk in pride in our cultural realities, we all gain, we all win.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Brooke, when back in the 80s and 90s, or even the 70s, when out of the Black Power movement, people would start taking African names, and when you might see a brother that you knew, as Bill, and he says, "Oh, my name is now, Jehuti," or something like that. Part of this indoctrination that we've undergone makes us doubt the sincerity and the authenticity of a person's effort to name themselves and reclaim, their essence and their identity by the act of naming. And I think it takes shaking sometimes, shaking loose from the grip of this massive apparatus that tries to homogenize all of us into them, and meaning they want me to be a white guy, and even with my skin and in my skin, if they've taken my mind away and placed in this cranium their mind, it's fait accompli, mission accomplished.
Yep.
they've succeeded, right? And so what we have to do, Brooke, I believe, I've heard this term, I love it, is decolonize our minds. Cleanse, decolonize our minds and discover who we are, and then learn again, remember how to be our true, authentic selves. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you there. And decolonize has become quite a buzzword, but it starts with what you want for yourself. Um, and just like you showed that picture, it could start by looking at pictures of your own indigenous culture, right? It could start by looking at your own indigenous art. I would say that the artists are in our communities, like they live beyond, their work lives beyond them, right? Like our regalia that could have been made 500 years ago is something I can learn from today, and you can also see how our art evolves and our cultures evolve over time through photos and art. And if you don't know your indigenous language, that's a place to start, is with like your art and photos, and just being curious, curious about those things, and finding an elder or a person who you're willing to be comfortable with and uncomfortable with, right? Because sometimes you're going to learn those hard truths, and they're not going to be fun to learn, and you're going to be made uncomfortable. Where that fragility comes in, even within our own communities of color. What we
Sure.
thought as truth, and sometimes in some ways is the exact opposite, right? So I think that the decolonizing of the mind, again, is not believing everything to be one way. And that's part of our worldview too, right? Is that there can be many ways to do one thing. There's even among different tribes in the Americas, there's different belief systems. So just finding the most diverse system that you can is going to be the way that you can decolonize your mind, and knowing that there's not one way to live in this world and to be.
Brooke, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. So glad to meet you and to have this conversation with you. Let's do it again in the future, because I want to find out, more about your relationship with the what's the organization?
Finnovation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm of a certain age, right, where stuff doesn't come as quickly. But yeah, Finnovation, love to have a conversation about what you've done with them and what that does to support your work. But just talk about the world. So listen, thank you, Brooke. Brook LaFloe, co-founder and operator of Niniijaanis. Correct? Close enough?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation. We'll see you next time.
You good? Thank